So, hello everyone. I want to thank you for joining me on here as I go to talk. I might talk fast, so if I can see Gretchen and Susan, so if I start speed talking, just flap your hands at me and I will take a breath. I might have over-caffeinated already today. So, my name is Sam, and I am speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Misswauga, Miami, Potawatomi, Anishinaabe, Waki, Pure, the PCAACA Haina, currently known as Detroit, Michigan. I do want to start by thanking our chair, Gretchen, for accepting my abstract, my friends and family for helping me along the way with my research, and then again, all of you for coming to hear me talk. And so for a couple of years now, I've been researching into people that intersect both fine art and punk rock, which both of these groups have slightly fuzzy borders. So for the sake of condensing my pool of creatives, I define them as such. Fine artists are those who have participated in exhibitions in spaces typically seen as high art, spaces like in New York City or London galleries, major museums, or taught in our general art history courses. Punk, by definition, refuses to be defined, and so it's a bit trickier to pin down. So I use how music producers have positioned them within the created musical genre, or if they frequently performed in punk spaces like CBGB's in New York or Bookies here in Detroit. I also use my experience as a punk to critically listen to the music produced, and if they carry that specific punk sound, which again, through lack of definition, can become really broad. And then, of course, if the artists themselves are self-identifying as punks, because to different subgenres within the greater punk idea, we all look, sound, act, and think differently, but still have this common ground together. My particular focus as of late is in folks that identify as women, which is a doubly overlooked group within the art world. And so many great artists such as Genesis P. Orge and Cozy Fanny Tootie, who started as artists first and later become beloved punk industrial icons that pushed boundaries in both art and music world. Through presenting the story of Colette Lumiere, I will highlight art history's selective recognition on important artists and caution the need to dig deeper into the archives to ensure future representation is accurate and credit for breakthrough works given to the right artists. There's a feminist appreciation for both art and punk and their existence in both and neither as a way of challenging social norms and ignored issues. The Riot Girls with their unapologetic uplifting of women and girls in their widespread zines. Guerrilla Girls with their very public critique of the patriarchy. Kim Gordon, who often falls into the shadow of just another female bassist, and her enormous contributions to music and fine art looked over. And Sheila Pepe, whose recent installation, as in last calendar year with partner Carrie Moyer at Art and Design Museum in New York, left little Easter eggs of feminist punks throughout the room. And there are so many more that are influenced by both and have a foot in both areas, whether boldly or subversively, and offer love notes from one to the other that can be seen or heard in their works for those that know where to look. While many of these artists have achieved some degree of recognition, which is why I'm able to draw attention to the intersections at all, they are often given less than their 15 minutes as a way for institutions to absolve their guilt and placate the public's cry for greater representational diversity. So my mission as an artist, as a punk, and as a researcher is to ensure that they are seen as the powerful artists that they are, and that there is a continued recognition of their accomplishments that will broaden the art historical discourse to include a greater truth. And with such a short time today, I could hardly cover all of them. So as I was running away with my research, I decided to focus on Colette Lumiere and Comb Transmission, which is Genesis P. Orge and Cozy Fanny Tootie, specifically for the female side of it. And so to be fair, as of late, there has been some recognition given to the many, as I had said, punk artists throughout the history, and some that are still creating works today, which is great. but the writings that I'm finding still feel as though punk artists is being presented as a fluke within punk culture instead of what I believe to be a fairly large majority when one's definition of art is broadened beyond the limiting discourse that has been presented since the first art history book was published in 1550. As an artist and a lover of history, I'm constantly seeking the motive as to why the art historical discourse omits so many fantastic artists while singing praises of others that are arguably less prolific. This is true for the artists I want to talk about today, with retrospectives of their works taking place in the last 10 years, one of them just last year. And my goal is to, again, diversify the discourse and compile. It's the main thing I'm doing right now, is compiling the found resources of various punks who contributed to the art world and society in general to help shape the art world and move forward, or how it moved forward after their artistic interventions. So Comb transmission was not one of those that I learned about in the traditional sense. For the most part, I do recall my grad school mentor mentioning Throbbing Gristle and Genesis Peorage as someone I might find interesting, but like so many things at that time, it kind of got filed into the later file. And so it wasn't until reading the exhibition catalog for Panic Attack, punk art in the punk years, that I was reminded of Genesis, and that I learned that Come Transmission held an art show titled Prostitution in 1969, which included visual art by the collective and early performances from Throbbing Gristle and Chelsea at their opening. Genesis Peorage and Cozy Fanny Tootie were the original members of the performance art group called Come Transmission, and they're originally from Hull, England, but after being literally chased out of town, they moved to London, where their performing arts groups actually received grants from the Arts Council and the British Council. Their London exhibition, titled Prostitution, was at the Institute of Contemporary Arts Limited in 1976 and was described by John A. Walker in the Art Design Cafe article in a way that it was described in a way that to me was comparable to other artists of that time that are immortalized in the art history discourse with their use of blood, which is not uncommon to the works of Vito Acconci or Chris Burden, female nudity and prostitution, as compared in that article to Manet's Olympia, and bodily fluids with the, other than blood, with the article directly mentioning Mary Kelly's dirty nappies. Similar to sexual works of Robert Mapplethorpe in Cincinnati in 1990, and from 87 when Andre Serrano's controversial photo Piss Christ was first shown, and on through to 2015, Comb Transmission as well received countless calls for censorship, and the photos of Cozy Fanny Tootie were moved from public view to by request only. Prostitution was attended by a conservative British politician, Nicholas Fairbairn, who was a Tory MP, and the art group was lambasted in the media the next day for their use of taxpayers' money to put on what was seen by the uninitiated as a lewd exhibition of indecency. Again, much like Mapplethorpe and Serrano were attacked in the U.S. And the latter mentioned men are now standards taught in art history when we learn about censorship and government funding, which this one predates both of theirs. Come Transmission inclusion of sexually related materials was a deliberate choice and with purpose, because just a couple blocks away from the art district in London, where their exhibition was taking place, is the sex district. And all Come Transmission was doing was closing that gap. They even went one step further and used the bad press in a situationist tactic by compiling it into a publicity leaflet in an attempt to turn the press against itself. The show did create an important conversation on funding decisions and censorship within England of that time, and the ICA director, Ted Little, firmly maintained that the job of the institution is to show all avant-garde art, and the Art Council's members attempting to pressure Little to closing the show and using discretion when allocating Art Council funds. After the close of this show, Genesis Peerage abandoned the visual art world at least, and formed Throbbing Gristle and later Psychic TV to continue to spread her ideas and concepts that center around physical and sexual abuses, as well as media hypocrisy, where the work of art collective and bands are demonized by the same content shared in the news is viewed as perfectly normal. And that rambly sentence is basically like, you can open a lot of the newspapers, especially England of that time. You will see the band's sexual work demonized. 3 pages later, you are reading the want ads and call girl things and advertisements for sexual objects. So it's that hypocrisy. Cozy Fanny Tootie continues to make art objects and does talk about Comb Transmission's years. Genesis recently passed away in 2020, but both of them do have great autobiographies out. So the next artist I want to talk about has been known by many different names at different points in her career, from Colette to Olympia, Justine, Matahari, and Stolen Potatoes, Countess Reichenbach, The Beautiful Dreamer, and presently Lumiere. Like so many artists, Lumiere's work, specifically her early work, was nearly lost if not for the curator Kenta Murakami, and a Kickstarter campaign organized in just 2021, resulting in an exhibition at Company Gallery that centered a partial reconstruction of her work. This revived attention brought works back into the public eye, including wall fragments from a 1978 performance at the Whitney's downtown branch. That performance was one that married 2 different types of performance, art and pop music, so to speak, which included her staged death at the Whitney during her art exhibition and her rebirth at PS1 days later as the frontwoman of the band Justine and the Victorian Punks, which kicked off her disco punk band and a clothing line. Colette spoke of her public art and its diverse materials as her wanting to experiment beyond the canvas, and so she used her home and the streets. Rewinding back before her staged death, Colette's work started on those streets in New York and elsewhere. With the transformation of her home, she decorated herself and her space with swaths of fabric and rope in a decadent way of living with it all, after seeing someone else's home with a parachute decorating it. She lived in it and documented it, and was quickly embraced by the galleries, and in the 1970s was performing sleep pieces in galleries in New York, Germany, France, and elsewhere. When she slept at the Clock Tower in 75-76, and the Clock Tower was the top 2 floors of a government-owned building in Tribeca. It's an alternative art space that was led by Alana Heiss and existed from 72 to 2013 before capitalism cleared it for luxury apartments. Jeffrey Deitch at the time said that it was one of the most important, most stimulating exhibits he had seen at the time in New York. She brought the rich decorations of her home into the gallery space, and she would either perform in the nude or draped in her fashions that often echoed her lived environment. In an interview with Katie Payton for Bomb Magazine, Colette talks of her stage death, saying, quote, "In 1978, Colette died at the Whitney. It was in a white room, a reconstruction of my living space at that time. And a few days later, I was resurrected as Justine and the Victorian Punks in an art rock concert at PS1. Everyone had become used to these soft environments, but now I appeared as punk and was destroying everything. There were art critics and collectors in the audience, and I was throwing art history books. That was shocking for a lot of people, but that was my revolution. That was my statement for the art world. I'm not going to wait until I'm dead." The whole Justine series was a statement on the irony of how the artist was supposed to be on a pedestal, like a saint. But for artists that are alive now, most of the time they are not recognized or they are not supported by the commercial world, and it was a very awkward place to be. So I created Justine, a living sculpture, and staged events where she would appear, end quote. Her sleep pieces, those with the soft environments, influenced so many other artists to work similarly, or perhaps they were absorbed by the zeitgeist without acknowledging her as the innovator. Since her sleep performance in the 70s, the art world has applauded Janine Antoni for her piece Slumber, created between 93 and 2000, where she slept and during the day wove her brainwaves to create a blanket of her REM patterns. And not unlike Lumiere sleeping draped with her fabric environment. So it's that shared draped life. And perhaps well known because of her fame in pulp culture, The Maybe performed and, according to the articles in the website, conceived by Tilda Swinton in 95 and 2013, where she slept in a glass box at the Museum of Modern Art, nearly identical to the sleep work of Lumiere. What would that be, 35 years earlier? So the statement for artists, as Lumiere put, for artists that are alive now, most of the time they are not recognized or they are not supported by the commercial world, as she said just in 2013, and she is still alive today. Lumiere would be fully aware of Swinton and Antoni and all other artists praised for their innovation with sleep, while she herself was near to never cited as an influence despite having done the work nearly 40 years prior. And she knew it then, and she's living it now. And I legit Googled sleep artists, and of the 5 articles I tried parsing through, she was not listed in a single one. Like, not one, and these are 10 to 20 artists being listed that work with sleep. So Lumiere still exhibits and creates, but has nearly lost much of her work to both a lack of space, which is also that lack of funds through her lack of recognition, and almost to environmental tragedies, as one of her storage units was hit by a hurricane. The most recent display of her work just ended February of this year, February 2022, closed at Contemporary Gallery in New York. And initially, Murakami and Lumiere considered including the artist's new work, because again, she is still creating. But they concluded it was important to dedicate the company show to the era of the living environment, to cement the work in history and offer an entry point into a new generation, or offer it to a new generation to discover again Lumiere. And so the work was created between 72 and 83. And so it's an interesting thought to secure the work's place in history in this art discourse and its art world validation, as if it didn't happen without it being commemorated in the archives of the art exhibitions in the form of a retrospective. And that's the specific part, because she did exist and she did show in these major institutions. So it's that retrospective that needed to commemorate the thing. And so that puts me at 18 minutes. I don't really have a conclusion together because I knew that all the stuff I packed in there was too important and I didn't want to cut any of it.